My thesis is much simpler, which is I believe the question in our lives is not, do we have something great inside? I believe we all do. It is rather, will you get it out or will you die with it? And there's enough of our world that is designed to distract you from ever doing it, from ever developing that thing. I think it's criminal how the biggest market cap companies, their business model is, plainly put, steal your life.
Death scroll on Facebook.
Yeah, unless you scroll and you wake up 80 years old, that guy on the sofa scrolling and double tapping, talking about how you could have written the book, written the music, started the company, done whatever, right? That's how he gets a yacht, by you giving up your life to him. And I think that's criminal.
Well, welcome to the podcast today. My special guest is Steven Puri. Steven has been in the movie industry and he's now a coach. But Steven, you have one of the most interesting backgrounds I think I've maybe had on this show. If you go look Steven up, you're going to see that he worked on, or was part of so many films that you'll recognize. I think you had your hand in Braveheart, working with Mel Gibson. If you go way back, you've been working as an executive producer. You worked with DreamWorks. You've worked on shows like Die Hard, Wolverine, and probably 100 other shows that people would recognize. But what I find very, very interesting is you've I don't know what you call it, graduated out of that, but you've been an entrepreneur and tech person now as well.
I walked. I had the mortarboard. It was awesome. It was a great ceremony.
But what I find interesting is you are really spending a lot of time, you've for multiple years now focused on finding flow. And when you think about flow, a lot of people will picture musicians or athletes and you get in that flow state. True. And when they're on stage, it's just like you lose track of time working, but you've gone probably deeper than almost anybody I've maybe come across on that topic. And
what's funny?
It's fun to share.
It'll be a lot of fun to share. Thank you to everyone who's listening. I hope this becomes one of your favorite episodes of the pod. The thing that Jason is alluding to is the guy who named it flow is this Hungarian-American psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, right? And he had a thesis. One of the things that fed his thesis was observing like jazz musicians and improv, freestyle rappers, like that sort of thing where it's like, how do you do that? Well, I just kind of lose myself in the flow, I become one with the music, that sort of thing. And he said, it's interesting because it's not just these musicians. You can talk to high performers in a bunch of disciplines, athletes and inventors and scientists, and when they talk about the concentrated state where they do the thing that makes them famous, they often talk about it in very similar ways, even though what they're doing is very different. And he's like, there's something there about us as humans. So he did, the research, the interviews, and he wrote the book Flow. It's why we call it a flow state.
Well, and I find just that name Flow, I'm big into whitewater kayaking. I play piano and all that.
There's a lot of flow there. Yeah.
I love rivers. And it's one of those things where when I was kind of looking at your thing, I find more peace when you're on a river. If you've ever floated a river, you have to lose track, especially if you're going into a big rapid. Like if you're not on your game, you could get hurt or killed, in certain states, and you've got to completely just dial your mind in, or the consequences become so big. So you're kind of forced into the flow of the river, but you've got to be in that flow state.
Or you're forced into the river.
Right. So,
it's funny you say that because Mihaly said a beautiful thing, I think. He said, the reason I chose this word flow, even though many of the high performers with whom I spoke, they have their own word for it. Like Michael Jordan talks about being in the zone. It's just me and the ball when I'm in the zone, right? Picasso had his thing with the muses, and Einstein talked about, the thought experiments where he'd be lost in his, and he said, even though they all had different terms for it, I chose this word flow because it was the most beautiful metaphor for what I found, which is we are all on the river paddling to move ourselves forward. But if we align our boat with the current, it carries us. It magnifies our efforts. And that is what these people have figured out how to do. And that I thought was such a great way to encapsulate this thing of saying like, hey man, we all have the ability to paddle, but if you want to take advantage of your natural brain state, like it will magnify your effort. And when I first experienced a flow state, I just wish someone had told me about that in college. I was like, why did no one tell me about this earlier?
Well, and I think the hard part with, and if you've been down a river, you've got that flow where the line goes and you're going to move on its own, but there's eddies and other things that will pull you away,
And
it's just
holes and
really just like life. And no matter, like, if you end up getting even a little bit off course, your boat will literally go upstream and backwards the wrong way. And I think as musicians, a lot of us are guilty of, just creative people in general. A lot of times I call it chasing squirrels. One of my favorite scenes is from Up, that Disney Pixar movie, when they say squirrel and all the dogs just whoop, and I find that so often with myself and other creatives, where next thing, they're doing the thing, but all of a sudden shiny object, and we're, spent 2 hours chasing the wrong thing going upstream instead of down the flow current where you were.
Right. And what you bring up about squirrel and, distractions and stuff. For those, I know there's some portion of your audience, they're like flow masters that are, in flow right now, floating above their desk in nirvana. There are others who have probably heard about flow states now because it's becoming pretty popular in the zeitgeist. And it might behoove us to spend 30 seconds just defining what you and I are aware of, right? So when Mihai wrote about flow states, he said, here's some of the characteristics. As you mentioned, Jason, you kind of lose track of time. You're not staring at the clock, right? You lose your sense of self in the work, like the jazz musicians, the freestyle rappers we're talking about, as you're not self-conscious. You often do your best work in less time than you think necessary. You can feel a sense of uplift at the end of this, as opposed to a sense of like depletion, like, oh God, that was so hard, I did it. It's more like, oh wow, I'm ready for more. This was great, right? So there's more to it, but I'm being a little reductive. But it's interesting as he wrote this, saying, there is this weird phenomenon when you talk to these guys and girls, but some other people challenged it, saying, is this really a thing? This flow state where you lose track of time and distractions fall away and you're in the work. And so they thought, I think this is amazing. I think it was Charles Lim at Johns Hopkins said, you know what? I'm going to take some jazz musicians who report getting in flow. Like there's a moment in the trio when I just am part of the music and like, he's like, I'm going to take them and stick them in an fMRI machine and see if there's anything that's different between when they start and when they say they feel like they're in flow. And he came back. He's like, it's weird. When they report like feeling like they become one with the music, one with their trio, their prefrontal cortex, like behind your forehead, that has a lot of your sense of self and self-consciousness, he's like, the activity shuts down. And it's true when you are, a lot of the people, in my Sukha community, they are creators. And by that, I mean, they create code, they create words, they create sounds, they create designs, right? And to get into that flow state and be able to say, hey man, I'm not editing myself. I'm not second guessing myself. I am allowing the muses to channel through me. That's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And, you look up 2 hours later, you go, this is cool what I did. Now, this was a great thing. Hopefully you remember to eat and go pee and stuff.
For sure. I've had that as a musician. I think one of the first times I really realized that is I was working on my first album, and I ended up being down at the recording studio, and I think I got down there like 5 p.m. Usually we try to wrap up by 11 p.m. It just happened that we were nearly done with the album, and I was supposed to fly to Mexico down to Cancun with my wife the next day at around 10 a.m. And
wow, okay.
next thing I know, I look up and it was 4:30 a.m. And I had and there was all three of us there in the studio, and we'd been working. I was like, oh crap. I didn't even call my wife to tell her I was going to be late. She's going to wonder if I get in a crash. But then I'm in this like weird zone of like, do I call her at 4:30 in the morning and say I'm on my way home?
Which one is better? Which is the better option here?
But it was one of those where you just kind of lose complete track. You feel happy. I wasn't tired. I just felt pure joy. Once I was done and I got home, I had my first 4-hour energy drink. That was the thing back then. And I had enough energy to get to the airport and get on the plane and go. I don't think Stacy talked to me for several hours, and I probably slept anyway. It's probably better we didn't talk for a bit, but
yes.
I don't think very many people have that realization very early in their life. It's very, sometimes I think it's very rare for people to even have that, because they just go show up and they do their job and come home and don't love what they do, I guess.
I had the universe give me this experience where I had to kind of unpack it. As you know, I live in Austin. I was going to San Francisco to meet with my team the next day, right? And I thought, okay, on the flight, I have an idea for a feature that I wanted to kind of mock up with my hacky Figma skills. And tomorrow I'll present it. And if there's some enthusiasm in the room, like, one of our designers can pick it up and make it pretty and, we can engineer it, right? So get on, Alaska runs that Austin to SFO nonstop. Get on the flight. Captain's like, hey, kids, sorry, Wi-Fi's out, see you at SFO. Okay, cool, whatever. Take off, start working. Like 15 minutes later, we start descending. And I think, okay, there's something wrong with the aircraft. They're going to land at DFW and be like, oh, the hydraulics, we're going to swap the aircraft or whatever. Fine, so we'll be 2 hours delayed. Not the end of the world. I looked at the clock on my laptop. Over 2 hours and 40 minutes had gone by. I had no concept of that. I didn't know if the drink cart had come by. I didn't know the name of the dude in the seat next to me. But my designs were done, and I liked them. And maybe you've done this. I had prepared myself for get in the Uber, grab a sandwich in the hotel lobby, go up to the room, sit at the ugly little desk and try and bang this out and pass out and go to the meeting, right? I got in the Uber. I called a buddy of mine at SF. I was like, I have a free night. Do you want to have dinner? So I'm relating this to him going, I got off the flight. I felt great. The signs are done. I thought it'd take me 4 hours. It took me like 2 hours and a couple of minutes, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, yeah, you were in a flow state. I'm like, oh what? He's like, have you ever, like, are you an idiot? Like, how do you not know about this, right? And I was like, tell me more. And so he sort of said, that was a flow state. These are kind of how it works. And, you can research it more, but it was just a casual dinner conversation. I was like, the first thought I had was, why didn't anyone tell me in college? Man, that would have changed my college career, right? And that led, of course, to the journey of discovering what is this, and all the smart people who have dug in. Since Mihai Csikszentmihalyi sort of wrote his foundational book saying, I'm going to call it Flow, here's what we found. And then you have, the Kotlers and also the Newports and the Nears and the Allens and the Clear, like all these guys who have dug in and said, let's do research on some aspect of this. How do you get to this place? And that to me is fascinating. And that's a lot of what I, as that's what I do now.
Well, I didn't realize I was figuring this out when I was in high school. So, and I'm curious to follow up and ask you how to get there. But as I look backwards on my life, when I was in high school, I was terrified of heights. So I joined the diving team and dove in high school, and then I went rock climbing, and all of it. Like I'm terrified. Like I get dizzy when I'm high, and
I'm with you. I have acrophobia like on 11.
Oh, but I found with the rock climbing the exhilaration of like getting to the top and just being terrified that you were going to die. All of it somehow put me in this other place where all you could do was focus on what your finger and your toes are doing at that moment, and we would climb to I was climbing 5'11", like crazy hard climbs that would take 6-8 hours sometimes, to get to the top of. And, by when I was kind of in my peak, now I'm old and fat now, and that's not a thing I'm really wanting to do anymore. But as a high school, I think as I look back, the reason I loved that so much, I hated it and loved it, but it forced me to just completely, it was almost like you were outside of your body a little bit, in order to be successful.
You have to get into a state to do that.
Your head. As soon as it got in my head, I'd realize I'm hanging 100 feet up off this cliff and there is nobody to bail me out. Like it is just me. And you'd have to force yourself to get back in that zone. Yeah. And to not die. And so I'm curious, how does this work? I mean, if you've got all these smart people that have figured it out, what's the key? I mean, for musicians out there.
Let me just say this. Anything smart that I share, I want to acknowledge has come from a lot of people who spent their lives studying this. So I'm here to relay knowledge, but I'm not the smart one. I'm happy to share, and let's move this forward. And that's, why I created the community I created. It's just to share the stuff. So there are some conditions precedent that now there's enough body of research to say, yeah, these things seem to help clearly. A big one is music, right? Which I think you know something about. And the research says there's a sweet spot for most people that is 60 to 90 beats per minute. Certain key signatures more than others, like D minor and a couple of minor key signatures and stuff, that it's melodic but non-vocal, like long melodic stretches that repeat. And there's a weird band between music you dislike and music you really love. Both of those don't work, but that middle band where you're not like so into, you're going, oh, I love this song, I'm going to sing along with Britney or Blackpink or whatever, like, but you're also not going like, oh, I hate country, whatever it is, right? It's that middle band where you're like, okay, this sort of lulls my brain into it's blocking out the world. So there are some fantastic apps that are built around this, like Brain FM and Endel and Focus at Will, and fantastic ones built around this research. That is not to say we don't have a friend. I'm sure you and I both do. That's like, oh man, I listen to show tunes, 90s gangster rap, like whatever it is. That's their way of getting into flow. I will tell you a funny thing that I learned though in the course of putting together our company Sukha. I happen to work in film, as we discussed. So when I was like, oh, here's all the research, here are kind of the specs for great flow music. Let me call up some film composers I know who have time on their hands now. Say, hey, could you write like 1,000 hours of this? It's pretty, doable in that a lot of the tracks are 20 minutes long or 30 minutes long, right? It's not like 3-minute pop tracks for 1,000 hours. So threw this up, and sorted it into playlists. Lo-fi, more upbeat, down tempo, binaural beats. And a buddy of mine who is a sound mixer up in Marin for LucasArts, he does the Star Wars games, right? He calls me up one day. He's like, hey man, are you working on Sukha? I was like, yeah, I am. He goes, I got something for you. Okay. He's like, I was just in Nepal. I was like, good for you. He's like, yeah, high school, like his son did really well, I guess, in high school and got into good college. So that was his graduation gift. Where do you want to go? I want to go to Nepal, Dad. Let's go do his father-son trip, right? So go to Nepal. He said, one day in Kathmandu, it rained so hard we couldn't go out. It's this lush, delicious, like warm rain. But I did have my recording equipment. So I recorded like 2 hours of rain in Kathmandu. I got back and I realized I'm never going to use this in a Star Wars game. I don't know when I'll ever use it, period. And I remembered you had that Focus app, that Flow State app. Do you want it? And I was like, for free? Sure, let's try it. So he and I agreed to put up a playlist in the middle of all the music, right? Put up a playlist that was just called Himalayan Dream Rain. It became our third most popular playlist with no mention, no promotion, just sticking it in the list, right? And I was fascinated because on one side, I was like, hey man, we paid all this money for this beautiful custom orchestrated music and rain is like this huge hit. I was like, okay. So I run the platform. I know a lot of our members. I emailed some and I was like, hey, Jason, I see you're listening to, rain a lot. Can I Zoom with you for 5 minutes? I just want to understand that. And I'm telling you this, if you were to reduce down everything that people told me, they basically said this. They said, well, yeah, it reminds me of a time when I was younger and I had to study and it would be raining outside. I was raised by my grandmother in Georgia. Around finals, it was always pouring rain. Would be inside. It was just this thing. My family has a lake house in Michigan or Wisconsin it was. And it was so interesting going, oh, so your brain was trained that there's this trigger of rain outside, inside, cloister, do like the deep work. So of course, what does stupid Steven do? Think, well, rain's this magical naturescape thing. Let's throw up playlists of like streams and surf and, also flatlined. No one cared. It was a waste of time, right? I was like, okay, fair enough. However, it did get one of our members who's a pretty well-known blogger in the UK who lives outside London. And she reached out. She said, hey, Steve, I see you've been experimenting, with these other playlists, this non-musical stuff. She said, I got to tell you something. Everyone knows me as this cool coffee shop blogger, She said, not a lot of people know I had a baby right after the pandemic. And I can't really go to the coffee shop where I write with like a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old. But I really miss it. Is there any chance you would put up the soundtrack of a coffee shop, like Coffee Shop Walla? So yeah, found some dude in Vienna, Austria who had recorded a couple hours at his local coffee shop, right? Mm-hmm. The espresso machines and the clatter of plates and the murmur of people. Threw it up there, became incredibly popular with writers. A bunch of bloggers, authors, like copywriters we have, they love that sound of the coffee shop. And anyway, a lot of learning about how the music part of flow, contributes and gets us there. And, there are other things to not be too reductive or too long. Music definitely helps you get into flow. And if you're a musician, you're creating your own music as you go, right? Distractions, the better you can block them. Like, I think I got into flow the first time because the Wi-Fi was out on the flight, so there was no Wi-Fi telling me that I had to check my WhatsApp or check my email or watch a YouTube video or social media or anything, right? So it's sort of self-enforced, no distractions. So when we were building Sukha, of course, we built a distraction blocker to turn off your phone and all your stuff so you can just focus whenever you're doing. And there are other things like Mihai writes, you really need to have a clear goal, something you think is meaningful. He's like, none of the high performers that I met, they get into flow doing stuff they think is stupid or meaningless. It's like, you have to believe what you're doing and you have to have skills that apply. He's like, it's not Picasso trying to throw a basketball or Michael Jordan painting. It's, you get into flow because you're doing something you've been training to do and you're doing it at a level that challenges you. And of course, that's true, I think, for a bunch of your audience that, are musicians.
I'm curious, with all that stuff, I find a lot of people procrastinate. And they'll be like, it's almost like there's an emergency. Yeah, well, but I'm if I look back on times where I'm like, okay, that was crazy what I was able to accomplish. Oftentimes, some of the best work comes when you're under the gun, and it's almost like your mind puts things off so far that you get yourself in. I know a lot of creatives that do that, and somehow, something that was going to take 2 weeks to do, they get done in 2 hours, and you look back, and it was probably better than had they spent 2 weeks of their time on that.
I love that you said it that way, because I'll tell you this. I've had this conversation talking about time boxing. And for those playing along at home, time boxing is simply the concept. Tell yourself, write it down, put it in front of you, how long the thing you're doing is going to take, right? There's a concept called Parkinson's Law, which is tasks expand to fill the available time. So if you say I have half an hour to write this blog post or 2 hours, you'll be right both times, right? So I've had this conversation talking about, time boxing, declaring to yourself how long something will take. You magically will finish in that time. And especially, I'm talking about writers now in particular, had writers tell me, you can't do that. Okay, well, tell me about your process, Jason. Oh, well, it always comes down to, like the last 3 days or when I get all the good stuff done, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay, so you time box because it's due. The Writers Guild contracts give you this many weeks to write it. You just happen to compress it into the last 3 days. You time box it in your own passive aggressive way with yourself, right? It's not that there's a time box. You just don't want to admit there is one. And it was really kind of an eye-opening thing, having that conversation. People are like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I do. I goes around make this time box by backing against the deadline. I was like, imagine you took those same 3 days and you simply told yourself you had to be done the Friday before.
Think how many more time you'd get things done. Right.
So it's funny because you can resist the idea, but if you try it, you're like, oh my God, this is super, super interesting.
I had earlier this year, and this maybe apply to some of the musicians out there. I got asked by a symphony they wanted to have me come and do a concert and play with them, but I play piano. Like I've done like two or three songs with an orchestra. And then I've had Chuck Myers, who's like the Disney Hogwarts Legacy guy that orchestrates everything for me. But they asked me to come and do it. And then that's great. I got Chuck, but I don't do very many songs with that. And they're like, well, we want to have like a 90-minute concert. And from January to the end of really mostly just 1 month, I cranked out 90 minutes of full score, 70-person orchestra of music that we then performed for the concert. And the crazy thing is I'd never done it. And what's funny is I had put this off and told myself I couldn't, that I didn't know how to do it. And so I'd always have other people and I'd pay them to do it. And I had a couple of people step in and help me to get started. But all of a sudden I had this realization, it was almost like I broke through that wall that I told myself in my mind I wasn't capable, and gave myself permission to do the thing. And the next thing I know, I'm, yes, it took 20, 22 hours straight sometimes to do a full symphony on a song, but all of a sudden I had permission mentally to do it, and I did it.
Which opens up an entirely different and longer conversation around what we believe we're capable of and what we tell us we're not.
Yep. And I would say when it comes to musicians and entrepreneurs, I think the funny thing is if you've been in the entrepreneur world, especially, people will talk about how important it is to believe in your thing you're working on, or that the thing can be successful, or believe in yourself. And, all the get you all hyped up and rah, you can do this. A lot of these conferences people will go to, that's the whole thing. And it's like, I've been doing 100 of these things. It's like, okay, I want the tactical, what's the thing I can do? But the more I've been playing this game now, the more I've realized that really 90% successfully accomplishing the thing, whatever it is you're setting out to do, comes down to, do you believe you can do it? And, it's this belief thing. It's crazy how the abilities have got to be there a little bit, but it actually doesn't matter as much as you would think it
When
does.
we were talking about, before we recorded, we were talking about what is the most helpful advice for musicians who are coming up, like how do you navigate this? And you've done amazing episodes on some very technical things around, hey man, here's how to think about needle drop and sync licenses. Here's how to think about winning a Grammy. You've done those. I'm not the guy here to talk about sync licenses, but I will tell you this. The best bit of advice that I could give is probably this. When I was just getting into film, right? 20s, all my friends are young development executives. We're all kind of like making our way. So you are devouring content. You are continually getting short films from some new filmmaker in Uruguay and scripts slipped to you from someone, and you're just scouring the town trying to find something good, right? And when you do, you share it with your little pocket of friends. You're like, oh, Jason, I read this thing last night. You got to read it. It's really great, right? Now, if you'd asked me in my 20s and my group of friends, who of this group is going to be the next Spielberg or the next Cameron, the next Fincher, whatever it is you want, right? We would have been wrong. I live in Austin now, as we talked about. And, there's the film festival here. There's South by, there's a bunch of stuff. So now, 20-ish years later, there are still friends from the film days who come to town and, remember I live here and like, oh, dude, my film's going to be premiering at Austin Film Festival. Come down. So you get to see them. I will tell you this. Those people who are reaching out going like, oh, my film is doing this thing. They're not the ones that in my 20s, we would have said they're going to make it. Because I suspected that the defining characteristic was talent. And it's actually not. It's tenacity. It is the ability to believe in yourself that when you get the no, you say, okay, so maybe no for this person or no for this day or no, there's something I'm going to learn that's going to help make it better for the next submission I make. And the talented ones very often took no as a rejection of themselves. And they didn't have the confidence of saying like, oh, Jason's having a bad day or his company doesn't like this horror genre or whatever it is. They just had a flop last week and no one's going to buy it. Like, no, they were like, it's a rejection of me talent. And it's one of the things I'm going to tell my son and daughter is, hey, strive to refine your talent, make yourself the best version of yourself you can be, develop your potential, but also understand that a lot of times no is not about you.
It's not yet, right? I mean, I think of the Dumb and Dumber. What's the one where he says, you're telling me there's a chance, right? If you remember that, Dumb and Dumber.
I don't know. I'm going to use that analogy with my children, but okay.
But it's interesting as you start to look back at who, we call it made it or success. And the whole premise of this podcast was, I started asking what is the definition of a successful musician, or what is success to you? I'm curious for you, Steven, for you personally, or if you were giving your son advice, let's say when your son's 20 years old, how would you define success to him?
Straight up as freedom is just, for me, it was about the freedom to pursue what you want to do, the freedom for you to wake up and say, what should today hold for me? And it is, if you want to be a great actor, if you want to be a great businessman, if you want to be a great doctor, whatever it is, like, it's the freedom to go pursue that. And that is an amazing thing. There's a huge cohort of people in the world that don't have that freedom to say, oh, I want to be a doctor. They are, saying, I don't know what to do. My rafting company is shutting down. They're not talking about how do I get into med school or how do I start a company or how do I, any of that. Like, so just the privilege of being able to say, I have the freedom to say, what do I want to do today?
And I think a lot of times, just to add to that, is having the courage to decide to do it. Because I think a lot of times, especially when people are young, in your early 20s, there's all these possibilities. Kids go to school and, they're at university and, you can be anything you want if, at least you can pick your major. But somehow in that 25 to 35-year-old zone, you get whatever your first job or second job was, you get doing the thing and it's like people feel trapped and they no longer give themselves permission to be brave and say, you know what, I'm going to take out a loan and go to school type of thing, like we do when we're in our early 20s, and I think finding that joy is, it takes a lot of courage, I think, for people to do that, and just being okay with it not working. I think some of the lessons that I look back on my career, the failures were some of the very best learning experiences for me to have not only the courage, but then to accomplish and, find the right people, make the right decisions to be successful at whatever the next thing was that we were going after at the time too.
I so agree with you. And that I guess I know we're drawing this to a close in a moment, but that really speaks to, for me, the reason why I do what I do, which is Mihai had his thesis around there's this magical state where your brain works a certain way, right? My thesis is much simpler, which is I believe the question in our lives is not, do we have something great inside? I believe we all do. It is rather, will you get it out or will you die with it? And there's enough of our world that is designed to distract you from ever doing it, from ever developing that thing, and I think it's criminal how the biggest market cap companies, their business model is plainly put, steal your life. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't get another 450-foot yacht. Yeah, unless you scroll and you wake up 80 years old, that guy on the sofa scrolling and double tapping, talking about how you could have written the book, written the music, started the company, done whatever, right? That's how he gets a yacht, by you giving up your life to him. And I think that's criminal. So that's why we created Sukha. It's why I do what I do. It's why I lecture about flow states, just to say, hey man, if you're one of the people who raises your hand going, I'm not going to take this with me to the grave, find allies, find tools, find a group of friends that support you in going to release your greatness.
Yeah. Well, I know we're about out of time, Steven. I would love to kind of go deeper on another episode with you, because I think there's
so
many topics. Awesome. I think the musician world needs, I think understanding flow is part of being successful at creating your thing. And I think there's probably a lot more depth that we could go, but if people want to check out, I know you've got your software or the company, you guys, it's SUKHA. I'm going to put the link down in the show notes. Sukha, very, very cool app that essentially helps you at least be aware of what's going to distract you, and then hopefully block as much as you can and focus.
Yeah. Get you into flow. Yeah.
But anything else that people where you'd like them to go check out a little bit more about flow state?
No. All I want is go do something great with your life. Go find that greatness and release it. It is too easy to sit back on the sofa and scroll and waste your life. Don't do it. Absolutely. Maybe the best advice we've gotten from anybody on the show. So, Steven, thank you so much for sharing your time and thank you for having me. Everyone who's listening, thank you for listening.
and I really would love to go get in some of the. I think there's just so much more depth that we could go, and some more time.
Yeah,
so
we'll do another one,
another episode. So, thanks so much.
Sold.
Hey, it's Jason here, and I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of this episode. Be sure to check out our show notes to learn more about our guest today, and if you'd like to support our podcast, there's a few things that you can do to help us grow. First, if you hit subscribe, it will help ensure that you don't miss a future episode. Second, if you'll share it with your friends on social media or send it via email or message, it helps us spread the word as well. And third, if you'll leave an honest review, it really helps with the algorithms so that other people can find our podcast. Finding success and fulfillment in the music industry is possible, and I look forward to seeing you on our next episode.